I need you annotating everything I'm annotating, because this is going to be your key to going back and like figuring out what you did wrong. Y'all, hello. How does that go away? Go away. There you go. Okay. All right. I need one person to have their phone out and be my definition looker-upper. Who can that be? Okay. Renee, you will be my definition looker-upper. Okay. So the reason why we define stuff is because we're a class of language, so we really need to understand the expectations. The words that I'm going to ask the definitions for, you know, but we need the degree of that word for us to truly understand. All right, here we go. So one of the things about this scoring rubric that is probably different than what you've had in the past is a couple of things. One, when you have been scored, or when essays have been graded for you, usually you start at 100, and for the things that you do wrong, you get marked down, okay? We start at 0, and for the things that you do well, we score up. If there is something that doesn't look right or is what we would consider wrong, we look past it and we continue to look for the good, okay? You did that on STAR, but I feel like with STAR, there's so much room in the 3 and the 4 that it's very unclear how to move from a 3 to a 4. What you'll see today is you'll see it's very clear. It's like a checklist of how to move to the different scores, okay? All right, here we go. So I'm going to start off by kind of drawing a squiggly line above and below the 5, because it is its own score, and I'll show you why. We'll come back to the 5 at the end. What you'll see is you'll see that I work in evens, and I work in evens because the evens have descriptors. 6 is adequate, 8 is effective. Those are your passing scores. Yes, 5 is 2, but just barely. Then we go to the 4. The 4 is inadequate, and the 2 is little success. So when I talk on scores, I talk upper half, lower half. Upper half is 6-8, lower half is 4-2. Then I'll say, is it upper, meaning 8-9, or is it lower, meaning 6-7, right? Lower, 1-2, upper, lower, 3-4. Okay, so it's kind of the language. And you'll get this because you'll hear me say it enough that when you guys are scoring each other's in table reads, you'll start talking the same language, all right? All right, we're going to start with 6, which is adequate. So, Brene, if you'll look up, what does the word adequate mean for us?
Satisfactory or acceptable in quality or quantity.
Okay, satisfactory or acceptable. The reason why we look it up is because there's going to be a huge difference between the 6 and the 8. I don't know about you, but I don't like being adequate. I'm way better than satisfactory. I'm way better than adequate. But what you'll see in here is that being adequate, you're excited to be adequate, right? One of the descriptors in a sample essay from the College Board says, in order to rise above adequacy, the student must. And so we've kind of created this hashtag over the years of rise above adequacy, so it's kind of our goal, right? So that's where we get it from. So what you'll see is this: essays earning a score of 6 adequately, so this descriptor is there, right? Analyze how Barry uses rhetorical strategies to characterize scientific research. Note that this scoring rubric is that one that you did, that's the other pink sheet of the video that you watched, right? Where before you wrote your timed writing, I said, watch this video. This goes with that essay. What I'm going to tell you is, it doesn't matter, whatever the concrete part is of the prompt, you insert there, okay? So whether this is Barry, or whether it was Green, or whether it is Edwards, or whether it is whatever we do, that sentence, you just take out the topic that you're doing and put in the topic that we have, okay? They developed their analysis with evidence and explanations. Here's your checklist. And meaning you have to have both that are appropriate and sufficient. So Brene, I need appropriate definition. And if somebody else has their phone out, look up sufficient. What does appropriate mean?
Suitable or proper in the circumstances.
Okay, so it's suitable, and what is sufficient? Okay, so we're going to say just enough. So notice what this is your checklist. Your evidence has to be appropriate and sufficient. Your explanations have to be appropriate and sufficient. If at any time one of them is not both of these, it is not a 6. Does that make sense? It has to happen more than once. Let's say one piece of, like one chunk, one of your analysis isn't appropriate or sufficient. It's just eh. If it only happens once, then it doesn't knock you down. We just kind of look past it, right? But if it happens again, then it makes your whole essay kind of thin because we pretend like that evidence is not even there, okay? They refer to the passage explicitly or implicitly. Explicitly for us means word for word. And when we talk about rhetorical analysis, you have to refer to the text word for word because honestly, like when we're talking about language, if you paraphrase language, then you don't really have the language in there, okay? Implicitly is paraphrase. Now, I would say there are bits and pieces that you can paraphrase if it's like a comparison or if it's like a metaphor or simile. You can paraphrase those bits and pieces. It's not the structure of the language, it's what he's saying, okay? The writing may contain lapses in diction or syntax, but the prose is clear. So prose is your style of writing, like your sentence structure, right? 6s are easy to read. I'm not having to figure out much. I can read straight through it. I get it. I got it. You're like, okay, it's good. That gets a 6. All right? So now, if we want to move to a 7. So essays earning a 7 meet everything a 6 does, but provide more complex explanation, more thorough development, or more mature prose. So that or means that a 7 is really just a 6 plus 1. It's a 6 plus one more thing. Any one of these. More complete explanation, more thorough development, or more mature prose. Most of the time it's more mature prose. So a 7 says exactly what the 6 says, but says it better. The 7 says exactly what the 6 says, but it's a little bit more developed or a little bit more insightful, right? So if there's just a little bit. So notice that to move from a 6 to a 7 is not difficult. A lot of times we'll start working on how you say things. We'll wait until the spring to really work on those. Right now, I just need you to say things. We'll work on how to say them and how to improve that part in the spring, okay? All right, that's a 6 to a 7. Easy, check, 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 all these things. All right, so now we're gonna move to an 8. So Brene, what does effective mean?
Successful in producing a desired intended result.
Okay, so an 8 is successful. There is a difference between being satisfactory or successful. Big difference. Okay, there's a big jump here. So now we say the evidence and explanations used are appropriate and convincing. All right, what's different between the 6 and the 8? One word. Convincing. So Brene, if you get a second, will you look up the difference between, or look up the word convincing? So notice we're moving from appropriate and sufficient to appropriate and convincing.
Capable of causing someone to believe that something is true or real.
And what's the next definition is what?
Leaving no margin of doubt.
Okay. I like the first one, but the second one I like better. So there is a difference between convincing, no margin of doubt, to it's enough. No margin of doubt, I'm like, whoa, yeah, I totally get that. Sufficient means, okay, ish. There's a big difference in those two, okay? And besides that, and that's for the evidence and explanations. Also, the argument is especially coherent and well-developed. Coherent means that it reads easily, it's insightful. Well-developed means it's thorough, that you cover all parts of the passage, right? Not every single piece of thing is going to be analyzed, but you cover the entirety of the passage, okay? The prose demonstrates a consistent ability to control a wide range of the elements of effective writing, but it's not flawless. We score this, and we say score instead of grade, because grading is like what you do in math, right? Where you're looking for right and wrong answers, and you tick, 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 tick. Scoring means I'm looking holistically at the whole piece, and as a whole, what is it scoring, okay? So we score it as a draft. So we don't take off for spelling errors, punctuation errors, grammatical errors, unless they get in the way of understanding. Then we don't take off, it just won't allow you to rise to a higher score. So this summer I read a 4-page essay that had 2 periods. That's a problem, right? When I'm trying to figure out where the thoughts are and where they end, that's a problem, okay? That's more than a draft error. All right, so that's an 8. All right, now, if we keep in the same mode, a 9 is just what?
8 plus 1.
Yep. So, the 9 meets the criteria for an 8, and in addition are especially sophisticated in their argument, thorough in their development, or impressive in their control of language. In all honesty, a 9 is more than just one thing, it's all the things. We call 9s unicorns because they're very, very rare. Very hard to find. And when you do, you jump up and down with excitement. So a lot of times I know it's a 9 when I read the introduction. If I get goosebumps on that introduction, it's a 9. I don't even have to read it. But I do because I love it, because I want to, right? So I don't know if you remember, but I told you this summer I scored right under 1,200. I scored 2 9s. The year before I scored right around 1,100. I scored 1. The year before, right around 1,000, I scored 1. That's about average, right? Our table this summer scored, I think, right around 15 or 18,000 essays just at my table. And out of those, I think we scored about 12 9s. That's it. So they're rare and few and far between. The 8, I would say, is not as rare, but it's fairly rare. I'd say I didn't keep count. Next year I'll keep count. I'd say I was under 50 8s. The mean score for all of the essays runs in the mid-4s, like a 4.5, 4.6, 4.8. That's for the country, right? Now keep in mind, my mean is usually a point above that. So my mean is usually around at least a 5.1, 5.2, 5.7. So on average, my kids score 5s on their essays, on average. But I have lots of highs as well, right, that bring that average up from that 4, okay? All right, that is the upper half score. Let's go down below. So 4 is inadequate. Brene, tell me what inadequate. How do you define inadequate?
Lacking the quality or quantity required, insufficient, or purpose.
So inadequate is lacking the quality required. So these essays may misunderstand the passage, misrepresent the strategies used, or may analyze these strategies inaccurately. Now notice our conjunctions have changed from and, where you have to have all these things, to or, meaning you just have to do one of those things to be scored a 4 instead of a 5 or a 6. So this is basically all the list. It's a list of things that can go wrong. Okay, so misunderstanding the passage. If you don't understand the passage, obviously you're not going to pass. Duh. Right? You can misrepresent the strategies. Now, that doesn't mean that you accidentally labeled something a simile and it's really a metaphor. It's like a trend. Like you completely misrepresent or mislabel over and over and over again the things, right? You may analyze the strategies inaccurately, meaning a lot of times inaccurately is inaccurate is wrong, right? So these are just things that are analyzed incorrectly. But notice here too, we go to the evidence or the explanations. So in the 6 where you have to have the and, if at any time you go to the or and it's consistent throughout, then you can drop from a 6 to a 4 very easily. So evidence or explanations are inappropriate, insufficient, or less convincing. Inappropriate, right, means the idea that it's, let's see how to define this. Inappropriate is going to be, even though evidence may be right, inappropriate is, I was going to say, it probably goes, it would go back to inaccurate, right? So inappropriate means maybe they don't match too. Meaning you have your evidence, but your analysis doesn't match what you're trying to analyze. Insufficient is the opposite of above, where we said sufficient is enough. It's too thin or not enough. Less convincing is there is a margin of doubt. And I would say it's not usually in your evidence, it's usually in your analysis that happens. Notice your prose is generally clear, but maybe less consistent in the controlling the elements of effective writing. The prose is still okay. What I say about a 4 is it's 5 minutes of tutoring. If you get a 4, I can sit down with you for 5 minutes and easily bump you to a 5 or a 6. It's that easy. Because usually a 4, you get the passage, you understand it, you've chosen good evidence, all you've done is summarized the evidence. So I need you just to add a couple of sentences in to bump you to that 5 or a 6. So it's an easy fix. So if before the 7 was a 6 plus 1, what do we think the 3 is?
4 minus 1.
Yeah. So they demonstrate less success, they are less perceptive in their understanding of the passage or of the strategies, or explanations or examples may be particularly limited or simplistic. Ethos, logos, pathos. Diction, very simplistic. And then there's less maturity in the control of writing. The 3s for a large part are usually not as well written, or are very thin, or is just a bunch of summary. Like there's no attempt or little attempt at analysis. Little success, I don't think we have to define little success, but here's your checklist. They may misunderstand the prompt, misread the passage, fail to analyze the strategies used, or substitute a simpler task by responding to the prompt tangentially with unrelated, inaccurate, or inappropriate explanations. So those are a list of all the ways you can go wrong. Prose often demonstrates consistent weakness in writing, grammatical problems, lack of development or organization, or lack of coherence and control. For the most part, we probably won't be writing 2s. That's the good news. And then a 1, again, is just one more thing done not so well, or one less thing done well. They're undeveloped, especially simplistic in their explanation and argument, weaken their control of language, or especially lacking in coherence and development. All right, so let me talk about the 5. The 5, notice, the 5 is neither adequate or inadequate. It is its own. I kind of label this as it just is. The 5 just is. Okay? So notice what it says. The evidence or explanations. So notice from the 5 to a 6, there's a big shift. Where the 6 is both, the 5 is one or the other, right? They may be uneven, inconsistent, or limited. So your evidence may be great, but your explanations may be uneven. Uneven is more in one spot, right? So uneven usually happens when you're writing your essay and you wrote a full first body paragraph, and then you look up and you go, oh crap, I have 10 minutes left. And then you just shove something on paper for your second body paragraph, right? So that's uneven. Okay, inconsistent is it's here and then gone. Or limited, which means it's very thin or brief. Writing contains lapses in diction and syntax, but usually conveys the student's ideas. The 5 is what we call a roller coaster, because that's the uneven, inconsistent. It's good, it's out. It's good, it's out. It's good. So that is consistent. If it's good and then it's out and then it's good, 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 that's still a 6. A 5 is consistently uneven, if that makes sense. That's why I say it just is, right? So everything from the 6 and above is a clear conversation with the reader about your argument. Everything below, I'm having to work really hard to make connections, okay? The 5, one time somebody explained the 5 as, like, it's like tuning a radio. Old time radio, not your new radios, right? Where you had the long strip of numbers, and then you try to get a 106 and you went too far right and you got to like the Spanish station. You got too far left and then it was the sports station. So you have to kind of figure it out. That's what a 5 is. I'm doing a lot of work to get you to pass. Okay? Now, the one thing that we need to remember is we, meaning readers, can't infer. Meaning I can't infer the connections you're making. I can't infer the connection you're making to the language. I can't infer your analysis. You have to tell it to me. So unless it's on the page, I can't infer it. Okay? So what's happened in the past with your essays is that teachers have inferred from conversations that you've had in class what you were referencing. That can't happen. That won't happen anymore. Okay? A lot of times teachers have gone, oh, he's worked so hard. He deserves a B. That doesn't happen in here. Because you're not scored on what you've done in the past. You're scored against everybody in the country. And this is really the first time for you to be scored that way, is in comparison to the whole country. Okay? So you may work really hard, and it may get a little bit better, but it may not be good enough to serve the next score. All right? That's what's frustrating. All right. Are we ready? I mean, you don't have a choice. So here we go.